James, this is a very visually just expansive movie. I don't know what kind of budget you had. Can you just talk about finding? I think on an interview you said most of it was shot in Wilmington, but there's also this small town in the Outer Banks, which I think is a complete find. Can you just talk about that complete find for you as a filmmaker?
Yeah, well, thank you, Greg, for, kind of talking about the scope of the film because that was one of the things I really wanted to achieve was the movie starts in a prison, which is very confined, but I wanted to kind of get bigger and bigger as we went. And all of the action kind of culminates on the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and it's this town Corolla. And there's a well-known lighthouse up there, the Currituck Beach Lighthouse. And I had visited that lighthouse maybe 5 or 6 years ago before I started writing the script. And I loved it because it was sort of secluded. It was not out on a rocky outcropping. It was surrounded by trees and it was mysterious. And I thought there's really something to be built around this lighthouse as a kind of location character in a way. And that area is fairly popular during the summer, but in the off season it gets a little creepy up there. It's isolated. The tourists are all gone. It's cold and windswept, and I thought this is a perfect place to set a thriller.
They're speaking of windswept. I believe two main characters, Dovey and Eve, when it has to do with someone loses something amidst the shore. You could
Mm.
have made it a completely simple shoot, and from the viewer's point of view, how complex was it to shoot that sequence? Because it's beautiful to look at, but I'm just thinking, how did this director do this? So.
Well, yeah, thanks. That was a real challenge. I mean, there were a lot of challenging shoots. We had boats on the water, we had underwater work, but this particular scene, I think that you're referring to is the one on the breakwater where she
Yeah.
loses something and he gets it for her. And that it was I mean, the rocks were dangerous. Those were, some huge rocks with these deep gaps in between. And so we had, it was in a way, it was almost like stunt work, even though it's a scene with dialogue with them sitting on the rocks. So they had to come out onto the rocks. They had to have the scene. She has to lose this thing. He has to go scrambling for it. And there's some underwater work actually in that sequence as well. I will tell you honestly, the first time we shot it, I thought we had it about 80% because it was just that challenging. And on an independent film, you don't have 3 days to shoot it. We would have normally done that over a few days, probably on a studio movie. And we only had part of one day to shoot that sequence. So I did go back and get some pickup shots a little bit later, some in, near Los Angeles. And so it was pieced together over a couple of days of shooting. But yeah, I'm glad that you thought it was compelling because it was a challenge to do, and we knew we had to get it right.
What made Dovey such a compelling character for you? Because I think we might be from the same generation, and I like the idea as far as this movie goes, the theme of no good deed goes unpunished, and he
Oh yeah.
can be very naive at certain points. Talk about just developing that character and maybe reaching back to, on a personal level, to a place that maybe we haven't been to for decades, which I thought was very interesting about just thinking of other people before just, in a naive fashion, but sometimes in a very inspiring fashion too, in a way. So.
I think part of that is was where I grew up in the South, in Western North Carolina, where I feel like, it's a progressive enough place, Asheville, North Carolina, but there's also a feeling of, yeah, you help your neighbor and you are loyal to your friends. And so I kind of grew up with that. And so I'm drawn to characters like that. That they're not complete angels, but they try to do their best. And I think there used to be more movies made, especially thrillers, with characters who, are caught up in circumstances kind of beyond their control, and they're maybe trying to do the right thing, but they keep digging themselves deeper. And I love this idea of, yeah, no good deed goes unpunished, because it's an antithesis to what we see in Ray, played by Dermot Mulroney. And I just love how Darren Mann as Dovey, who's the young man who's gone to fulfill this request from a friend. He's gotten out of prison and he's going to find this other prisoner's daughter who's estranged from him. And it's that request that he feels like he owes this man for helping him through his time in prison, that gets him in trouble. And that one sort of choice, is the cascading, leads to the cascading series of events, that he has to then decide, now, do I just give up and go back home and leave all this behind, or do I confront, these things that are in front of me? Yeah, I'm drawn to characters who maybe we can relate to, and even in thrillers, sometimes thrillers involve characters who are they're very capable, I think of like the Taken films, and I think of those movies as being, here's a guy with all this, he talks about a particular set of skills that he has, and he's going to go kill everybody. Well, I sometimes want to see what would your average person do in a situation like this, and I think that's what we try to explore in this film.
I'm a very simple cinephile. I see Dermot Mulroney in a cast. I just watch it sight unseen. So that was an obvious choice for you as a filmmaker. But what with Darren and Alyssa, what was that thinking process in casting them as pretty much the heart and soul of your narrative? They both do a great job and they work well together chemistry wise. But I think individually they're both significant in their presence and in their respective talents.
So I do think that Darren is very close to the character that we meet at the beginning of the film. He's the kind of guy who would do something like that for a friend. And then as he progresses through the movie, we realize he's in a place where he has to step up and make a decision to do some things he would never do. And I think that, Darren has the ability to create that arc because of where he starts. He's an empathetic character. He's an empathetic guy. I loved working with him. He also is the kind of guy that just goes in full force. So when Darren had to do underwater sequences and these kinds of things and action set pieces, it's fun to see a guy who maybe seems a little bit beaten down, a little bit naive, then come into his kind of movie star quality later in the film and step up. And Darren also has the ability to do that because he's very athletic and he could do some of that physical action we needed him to do. Alyssa Goss, I needed somebody a little bit mysterious. I needed somebody a little bit, she's enticing to him. Her love of the Outer Banks and the water and the lighthouse where she works is apparent. But there's also something that she's hiding. And I think that quality of, someone who's maybe, got some things that are not being expressed in her character early on. And then she has to do in a similar way to Darren. She has to step up later in the film and really face a past that is not done with her, that has now followed her to this place that she was trying to make a new home out of. So I think Alyssa does a fantastic job as well.
What's great for Breakwater is I get to actually learn a little bit about the area, the Outer Banks. It just seems to me as a viewer, you can enjoy it on an entertainment level, but I feel that it really has a real connection to place. So you as a director, how connected are you to the location because you're creating this world, and what connects you as a storyteller to this specific location on a personal level?
I love when the place is a character. And in a way, the place inspired this film, because I had visited the place and I'd seen that lighthouse and I'd been to the Outer Banks when I was a kid. And I thought, let's populate this place with some characters and have them be here for a reason that allows the place to kind of work on them a little bit. The weather, the fact that one character is trying to get to meet up with some other characters, and he's having a hard time getting there because it's not that accessible for him. Sometimes the physical nature of a place, the landscape, provides its own kind of conflict, right? So that there's the atmosphere of the place, of the Outer Banks, but there's also the fact that it is isolated enough to where it actually provides some interesting plot turns for us in the sense that, you can't just drive right up to it very easily, especially for somebody crossing the border from Virginia to North Carolina, which is part of the setup for this film.
James, I was wondering over the years, what have you learned as a filmmaker by sharing your craft with just as passionate students as far as teaching people, whether it's screenwriting or filmmaking? Do you learn something else within the dialogue and your experience as a teacher? And does that feed into your filmmaking?
So much. So much. I mean, I went to AFI. I came up through film schools. It was, first of all, you thinking about movies every day. And I think that most filmmakers are. I'm a writer as well. And then sometimes I think of myself as a writer first because I enjoy that process. And then I want to see the movie made the way I have it on the page. So I hold on to it very tightly and I decide I'm going to direct this thing. And I have had one of my scripts directed by somebody else, but I started off writing and directing my own work. And then as I started to teach after that, I really enjoyed what different generations who were in my classroom were bringing to the classroom in terms of the films that they loved, the film experiences that they loved, be it one genre or another, and you're just living in that every day, and it makes you go back and watch more movies, and I think that any great director is a student of film. And when you're teaching, you also have to continue to be a student of film because you're looking for ways to express certain ideas about how to craft something, about how to work with an actor, about how to manage a particular set piece that's written in a film as a director. You're thinking about those things. How would I do that? And so, it allows you to kind of hone in and focus your own work in a way. And honestly, the students that end up doing really, really surprising work, it's also inspiring.
James, my final question to you is, after watching Breakwater, can you name one of your maybe all-time favorite movies for our listeners to watch, just from your own personal screening room, just a movie that pops in your head and resonates with you, and why?
Yeah, this goes back a ways though. So like it's going to be like they're going to have to go back and dig it up. But I love The Night of the Hunter. I think that film with Robert Mitchum is brilliant. It's surreal at times. It's so expressive visually. It deals with this idea of morality and conflicting morality, not within one character as much as our film does, but just society versus a man who's a bit of a hypocrite, who's a preacher, who's also a murderer. And there was some inspiration for the character of Ray in the Robert Mitchum character in The Night of the Hunter. So check out that movie. You won't be disappointed. It's strange and beautiful. And I would love for anybody who's a cinephile or just maybe would love a return to that kind of noirish and Southern Gothic black and white film to see The Night of the Hunter.
I think it's one of the most beautiful movies ever in cinema. Plus, it's a screenplay by James Agee, who's a great
Yes.
writer. That kind of layers, is that kind of the stuff that you want to approach with your own filmmaking, making it sort of a sleight of hand where you think it's one thing, but there's so many other things beneath the
I do.
surface?
I think I think especially in this genre, in the thriller genre, there were a lot more sort of what I would think of as like literary thrillers made, in the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s, where it's complex layering of character, and we don't know everybody's, intentions right away. At the same time, we get a chance to, kind of learn about them through their actions, rather than defining them all, right away in the first 10 minutes of the movie and saying, okay, here's our hero and here's what he or she is after. Yeah, I think there's a literary quality to what I do, and I don't mean that in the sense that it deserves to be a great novel. I just mean it in the sense that I do think that a good movie can be like reading a good book in its complexity and its layering. And that, yes, you can go too far. You can go one turn or twist too far. But I think that audiences are a lot smarter. Audiences are a lot smarter than we give them credit for sometimes. And it's what has inspired me to write movies is getting deeper into these characters and what motivates them to do what they do.
And as you're leaving, James, very quickly, writing advice. You said you're a writer first. Sometimes you feel like a writer first. Do you just write really early in the morning before you have to start your day with all your other responsibilities? Is there an unlock as far as your own workflow as a writer?
I wish I could do that. I have an 8-year-old son, so it's sort of a lot of like getting him to school, and there's a lot of like stuff in the morning that but I will sometimes, when things are quiet, I'll head to the coffee shop early in the morning, after I've dropped him at school. But I'm sort of more of an evening writer. Maybe it impacts the kinds of stories I tell. I like to kind of get into the world. And one of the things I love to do in writing, and this comes with what I said about, literary, cinema, is I like to sort of not know what's going to happen next all the time. I don't do a full story outline before I write. I know the big turning points. I know the big, moments that I'm shooting for and I'm writing toward. But I really enjoy sitting down and going, I wonder what's going to happen today. And I wonder what this character is going to say. And I wonder what this character is going to do about that thing that other character said. And, so in a way, it's like sitting down with a good book and you don't know what's going to happen next. And for me, as tough as writing can be sometimes, and as much of a slog as it can be, the joy of doing it is sometimes being surprised, even, surprising yourself by what happens next.
James, really enjoyed your film. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Great questions.